some rain. And we're going to get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. As per the email that Marcel sent out earlier, please, we would ask that you keep yourself muted during the course of this webinar. However, I do encourage you to engage the chat function. I will be monitoring the chat function from my end, and then as you ask questions, I will be throwing them in to the presenter, Dr. Marcel Harting, to answer them as we continue over through the course of this webinar. So please engage the chat function. You're more than welcome to either send it in one of two ways. If you want to remain anonymous in the question, please send it to me privately in the chat function. Or if you don't mind me calling your name, you're more than welcome to just send it to all. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, I would ask that for just for the ease of the presenter to see everyone and engage you visually, to please put on your cameras for the duration of this webinar, just so that we can see your faces as well, so we know to whom we're talking. Thank you, Tabiso. I see your cameras coming on as well. You're so welcome with us today. But yeah, so without any further ado, those are the only two announcements. Marcel, I'm going to throw the ball right back to you. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcel Harting, or shall I say Dr. Marcel Harting, is the CEO of CCI Professional, a human capital consultancy house here in Pretoria, South Africa. And we look forward to hearing some wisdom from him today. Thank you, Marcel.
Lawrence, thank you very much, and to all our delegates also this morning that joins in for this rerun of the conference. We did a similar discussion like this about a month ago, and there were over 100 people that registered for that specific event. And also we received a lot of feedback where people said, yes, Marcel, unfortunately we missed it, we were just too busy or something happened in the day. Can you guys please do another session like this? So obviously we will make the recording available, and as we did in the first round also, it's not a public recording, but we put it on an unlisted channel in the end. But there's questions. People want to engage, they want to interact. There's some things they might want to see within the context of the Shadowmatch philosophy and how we also look towards the future when we are thinking about engagement of our staff and the performance of our staff also. So, ladies and gentlemen, this morning, let me just give you a quick oversight of our journey. We're going to be together for the full 2 hours. We are scheduled from 9:30 until 11:30. I will make sure that we have a pleasantry break to quickly fill up that coffee mug around about the hour mark, or quickly stretch the legs. It's unhealthy for us to sit too long, but also then that we ensure that there is some time for engagement also during the morning and as we move forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, just quickly on our outcomes also, we'll be looking a little bit of the change that we are seeing in the world of assessments and evaluation, and also to understand how do our people best fit into what we call an environment, which is the workplace, but also it might be expanded to include not only the workplace, but also components and elements of life and also the relational dynamics. We will be taking a quick journey into the actual Shadowmatch system. We will do a systems demonstration to also see what is the power behind this artificial intelligent cloud-based solution and how you can also use this within the context of your working environment. I'm trusting also our delegates today is a mixture between managers and leaders, human practitioners, HR, human resources, and other people that might just be interested in this topic of discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'm going to do a screen share where I'll be leading us into this discussion this morning. So if you will allow me a moment just to get out of the actual Shadowmatch system, and there we go, right into our discussion this morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is a topic that I'm personally extremely excited about. The question about how do we predict and how do we ensure that our people are successful in the workspace? I can't imagine having to wake up in the morning dreading a day to know this is going to be another day of failure. I'm going to a place where I'm going to try and be productive, but actually deep down inside of me, I know this is just going to be one massive failure. And so many years we have looked towards only the individual and say, oh, shame, poor individual. the person is not good enough, the person doesn't have the competency, the person doesn't have the skill or the acumen or whatever, but we will always focus on fault finding with the person. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a reality. Sometimes people are ill qualified. Sometimes people are in a position they should not be in. But what the research over the last couple of decades have shown us, in fact, is that many times, more often, it's not about just the person. It's rather about the person's fit towards an expectation, whether it's a behavioral demand, an environmental demand, and the person just doesn't fit the environment. I always like to use the example in a relationship. If you have two beautiful pieces of wood, but you take Prit and you try and stick the two pieces together, it's just not going to be a good match. What we need is some good wood glue to bring those two pieces together and to make sure they stick together. And that's the old saying of a square peg in a round hole, and that's what we'll be looking at today. So this is our key outcome, our key focus areas. The question, how do we optimize employee performance? Because ultimately, as leaders in businesses, that's what we're after. We want to make sure that our people are optimal in what they are busy doing. And we want to make sure that there is good retention, good engagement, good satisfaction in the jobs that they are busy doing. And that's what we'll be exploring today. So ladies and gentlemen, let me start off with what we call the principle of habitat. As a human practitioner myself, and having had the privilege of spending a lot of years within executive spaces, boardrooms, leadership environments, one thing that I've recognized is there is not one single executive environment or boardroom that's the same as the next. You know, this picture I had the privilege of taking it a couple of months ago when we were traveling the Namakwaland area here in South Africa. And for most of the seasons, this is a very dry, a very barren land. Even if you go up more to the northern parts of the country, Springbok and those areas, it's almost desert-like. And then something very interesting happened. Around about the end of July, there's a specific change in climate, where the rains fall right, the temperature's right, it's the right kind of wind, and the next moment, this barren desert land all of a sudden gets transformed into a lush, beautiful garden of the Namakwaland daisies, and they say there's up to 3,500 different flower species, of which 2,500 is only found within this western area of the Cape Province of South Africa. And this is the principle of what we call a habitat. The Oxford Dictionary would say a habitat is an environment that's conducive for life to flourish. And that is something that we want to see within our workspaces. How do we create a habitat that is not a dry and a barren desert landscape, but it's a place where our people will come to work, they will engage in work, and the landscape will flourish. It will be like this garden of flowers that we stand absolutely in amazement and in awe with the beauty of what's busy happening within a specific work landscape. Traditionally, we used to talk about industry standards. You know, if we had the right psychometric evaluation, if we had the right process, if we had the right steps or the secret formula, the one shoe fits all approach. Ladies and gentlemen, in a very, very stable world where all your employees is pretty much the same age, same gender, same religion, same academic background, same race, same cultural orientation, then perhaps we can have something of the industry standard. But as we move towards the fourth industrial revolution and this global village and all the dynamics that we are seeing, finding industry standards is just no longer as easy as it might have been a couple of years ago. What we need to explore is your unique habitat. We need to explore your work context. And it's not even just an industry. If we take, for instance, just an example within the mobile cell phone industry, the environment, say, of a Vodacom versus a Telkom versus a Cell C or an MTN, even though we might take a function in that business, let's say they're call center agents, it's still a vastly different call center environment. If we go towards an auditing company and we say, well, we've got a Deloitte or a PwC or a KPMG, again, we might take a chartered accountant within a specific space, but it's a vastly different habitat. It's a vastly different environment. We have so many case studies of an individual that is an absolute gem within a specific environment. They are flourishing, they are producing, And then they move on because they were perhaps headhunted or they thought it's a better opportunity, only to find themselves in a very dismal position where they struggle to cope with the new environment. And it's like a fish out of water that we now all of a sudden also require to run a 5-kilometer park run and perhaps even climb a tree. And yet it's a brilliant fish, but the fish in the wrong environment is just not working. And this is the principle of habitat. So let us consider for a moment just what is perhaps the theory, what is the research behind this? And there's a book written by the lead author and architect of the Shadowmatch system, a gentleman by the name of Peter de Villiers. And no, it's not the rugby guy we're talking about. Mr. de Villiers has been in the space of human analysis most probably for 45 years. He's already in his mid-60s and an extremely interesting chap if you have the privilege ever of getting to know Mr. de Villiers. But he's such a clear thinker and a critical thinker when it comes to the life of people, most probably because he spent so many years in therapy, helping and supporting people also to deal with critical failures within work and life. And in his book, Shadowmatch, Success for All, and you're welcome to get a free copy of this book on the Shadowmatch website under the resources, he starts with the following, and I'm only going to read 2 pages of this book, or 2 slides in any case, not 2 full pages, where I ask this question: why are some people successful in the work context and other people fail despite the fact that their skills and their qualifications are very similar? And we've all seen this movie. You know, 2 people graduating from university with pretty much the same background, same skills, same qualification. They go into the world of work. One person excels, they flourish, they climb the corporate ladder, and the other person really struggles just to make ends meet. I realized that my focus was on the wrong people. Why? Because he only worked with and dedicated his time to those who experience difficulties to function in a happy, successful, and a meaningful manner. And all of these people had a history of failure. Obviously, he's referring to people he saw in therapy, the patients within his practice. I then shifted my focus to get a better understanding of those people who were successful at what they do. Mr. de Villiers started this research in 1991. There was a first phase of research between 1991 and 1994, and then he started rolling out on a large scale between 1994 to 2006, a total of almost 15 years of research looking at what makes people successful. And all of that research is now culminated in what we know today as the Shadowmatch system that first went live in 2006. He continues by saying, yeah, I've spent many hours trying to identify what makes successful people different from those with a history of failures. And if they say it's many hours, well, that's 15 years. And then he makes some interesting observation. He says, I could not identify one single trait that universally defines success. There was no 7 habits. There was no 21 irrefutable laws. There were no colors or no whatever matrix we wanted to design that seemed to work for everybody, because the research showed some very intelligent people failed and some were successful. Some people from very poor families failed, yet some were successful. Some extroverts were successful and some failed. And then he makes a very, very interesting observation. Skills do not protect you from failure. Ladies and gentlemen, in my own personal experience as a human capital consultant, I've unfortunately had the, I wouldn't say the privilege, but the opportunity to engage with companies who's had a brilliant track record. I'm thinking, for instance, a architectural practice. Lawrence, our co-host today, also was with me specifically in that project. This architectural practice has been around in the city of Pretoria for most probably 35 years. If I list the monuments, in a sense, the great shopping complexes, the hotels, the office parks that they have given oversight and construction guidance towards, most of you would recognize who this company was. About 3 years ago, they completed a major project within the, I almost want to say, the inner city space. It was a multi-office / hotel / business park again. And then all of a sudden, they realized at the end of this process that their work pipeline has dried up. They have all the skills, they have all the experience, they have all the track record. And yet, when I started engaging with the CEO, and the CEO started phoning up all his business buddies in the developers group, perhaps the Atterbury's or the Applands or some of these groups, He all of a sudden came to the realization that his own generation has retired, and these new young leaders, and he's never been introduced to these new leaders. And suddenly realized that even though they've been around for 35 years, the skills that they acquired is no longer sufficient to lead this company into the future. And we were very close as that brilliant company went into liquidation, and they had to sell off different parts and different components. And this is the reality that Mr. de Villiers says, just because we have the skill and we think we are competent, no longer guarantees that we will be successful. I can carry on with the list. The question is, what did the research indicate? One aspect became clear. Successful people had behavioral patterns that engaged the demands of the environment in a positive, a productive, and a progressive manner. Those who failed had behavioral patterns that prevented them from functioning freely in the environment where the work had to be done. And here comes the grand conclusion. Success and failure are the results of the interactions between the behavioral patterns of the individual and the behavioral demands of the environment. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the principle of a habitat. Every environment, if we look towards the agricultural space, demands a certain kind of plant, a certain kind of flower, or whether it's a tree to grow in that space. If I take, for instance, the beautiful landscape out to the Groblersdal area, just as an example, which is famously known for all the citrus, we can't just assume because under lockdown I might not have had access to a good bottle of wine and I want to start planting my own vineyard and I want to have my own grapes. So I phoned my brother, say out in the Northern Cape in Kakamas or Camus, and I asked him, please send me a piece of your vineyard, and I planted next to the citrus trees. I can't just expect at the end of the season that the grapes will produce at the same level of the citrus if the environment is not conducive. Every farmer will tell us, before you plant anything, you first do a test of habitat to make sure there is a good match. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the focus area that we want to explore within this context. I'm going to pause here for a moment. Lawrence, I want to ask, are there any questions? I do see the chat function. There was a light up. Any questions or comments up to this place before we start talking about how we look at these different patches?
No questions at this time, Marcel. I just reminded the delegates in the chat function that they can send me an anonymous question by sending it to me privately, or a question to everyone. I will just throw it into you as soon as I see an opening to do so.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us continue this journey. The environment of the world is changing. I've said it many times, the pandemic brings changes, but the pandemic is actually not the major driver. The world of work is changing because of the fourth industrial revolution. And for those of you who are familiar with Professor Klaus Schwab, he's the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. He wrote the book on the topic, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. The pandemic is more just like a turbo that has now caused us, for instance, not to have this conference in a virtual space, but traditionally it would have been in a venue and they would have been catering and you would have taken a day off and drive and all of this. Now we can just lock in and most probably work and everything continues. And this is what Klaus said in the book. He said, in this new world, this fourth industrial revolution world, or as we just call it, an Industry 4 enabled world, it's not so much just the big fish that's going to eat the small one. Yes, we'll always have the big corporates, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Teslas, the Virgins, but it's going to be the fast fish which eats the slow fish. Because suddenly my market, my competition is no longer just my local village, my local community in which I used to compete. Suddenly there's now perhaps a chap sitting in India at the age of 18 designing a new app on a cell phone that tomorrow goes viral, and the next moment there's 1 billion users with a new artificial intelligence that somebody in the middle of a rural area somewhere in the world, which we don't even know of, might have designed. You see, we're looking for new attributes in our people. We're looking not only for classical skills and academic theory, we are looking for elements like resilience, agility, flexibility, creative thinking, critical reasoning, and the propensity towards change as we see this world constantly changing. And those are the guys that will survive as we move towards the future. It's the fast fish that's going to eat the slow guys. Ladies and gentlemen, let us talk about how do we consider these matchings. Let's take a very practical example. Say, for instance, we've got a person that we want to recruit, or for that matter, we want to promote a person. Traditionally, what we would have done is just to do a job spec. There are a number of tasks. I do a job description, and there's task A, B, C, D, and E. Whether it's now I want to recruit somebody to fulfill that role, or whether I want to do a promotion, perhaps it's an operational person and I want to promote them to a management role. Or you can even talk about succession planning. We can talk about project management. But traditionally, you had the job spec. Then I would go to the person and I would look at their CV. What is their academic qualifications? What is their skill set? What kind of experience do they bring to the table? And even in some cases, especially if it's the more senior roles, we might have a number of assessments that we can put a person through. Something relating to a Myers-Briggs profile for personality, or we might use a strength finder, or we might use a more DISC profile, or even if you have an industrial psychologist close by, we can do a whole in-basket of different evaluations. The long and the short is, what we're trying to do is finding a match. We've got a job description, we've got a bunch of CVs, and we're trying to match. And then we've got a predictive index to say, I am predicting out of the 10 candidates sitting in front of me, who has the best propensity to be successful. Ladies and gentlemen, the research on this is very clear. If we follow the stock standard traditional approach, job description, CV, and an interview, your predictive index is about 11% of guessing whether that person will actually become successful. If you have an industrial psychologist in the room and you've done some assessments, that's just a generic benchmark, it can go as high as 18%, which still means about 82%. We struggle to predict this. There is obviously components that the traditional notion of employment is not always effectively taking consideration. If we bring the line manager, interesting enough, into that interview environment, you can immediately push it up into the 30s or 40%, which means the line manager themselves plays a significant role because they understand something different. And the difference that they bring to the table is not just the question of a cannot and a can or a cannot, which is the CV elements, but what we call the want or the will not, which is the behavioral requirement of the environment. If the environment doesn't allow the person the habits which is natural to them, that environment will cause the person most probably to fail. The line manager is the person that understands the environment to a higher degree than perhaps just HR. And that's why it would be wise to consider bringing leadership on board when we do something like a promotion or recruitment. But we can take this one step even further when we want to explore the entire context. And we want to do this in a scientific-based method. And we want to do this in an artificial intelligence basis and not just trust the line manager's kind of gut feel that perhaps would put it, say, to 30 or 40%. But is it possible that we can push this up all the way to the 80s or the 90%? And the answer on the research for that is yes, that is possible. How do we do this? We do this by finding a successful match between all three of these components. We need to understand what is the task. We need to understand what is the acumen that the person is bringing to the table, the skill and the knowledge. But critically now, we need to understand what is the environment in which this job will be done. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where Shadowmatch plays a critical role. So how do we do this?
Marcel?
Yes, Lawrence.
If I can just interject there for a moment. We have a question and a comment. The comment comes from Kevin, which I find extremely interesting, where he says that it reminds him of a soccer team where a coach is successful with one team individual environment, but not successful with another team with equivalent skills. Maybe just something on that.
I fully concur with what Kevin is relating to. I've had the privilege of coaching rugby teams within a high school capacity. And it's always been a mind-boggling thought that one year and one team excels, and you ask yourself, well, is it just better players? And then the next year, for some reason, is just not doing the same. And again, we ask, is it the players? It's a yes and a no. But it's not so much just the acumen. One year you've got the brilliant players. It's got much more to do with how does the team come together. And let me give you the obvious reasoning behind that. If you read the books on the All Blacks rugby team, which is most probably the most celebrated sports team, not just rugby team in the world, they've got the saying, we don't just employ the best rugby player, we employ the best All Black, because we're looking for the match. We're looking for whether the person fits into that environment. So fully concur with that statement.
Kevin continued to ask the question, can the environment also be equated with the culture of the organization?
Yes. Yes. So what constitutes environment? This is a very interesting conversation. I unfortunately do not have all the technical data with me, but I've spent quite a bit of time speaking to Mr. de Villiers about the research that they did during the 90s and the 2000s. And his personal comments to me is, Marcel, I originally tried to map an environment by doing a direct environmental assessment. And this will actually lead to the comment on the slide that I'll get to in a moment. And he said, after a couple of years of studies, I've come to the place that there's more than 420 environmental markers. It ranges everything from every individual to the building, to the lighting in the rooms, to whether there's a tree or a grass patch or a waterfall outside, whether we're on a mountain, whether we're at ocean level. It deals with the culture of the people, social, ethnic culture, religion, race, all of those demographics. How do we dress? How do we address each other? What is the language used? And then we can go into all the organizational culture dynamics. What kind of systems do we use? What is the legislation within our working environment? What is the demand of values and virtues that we believe is there? So that actually brought Mr. de Villiers to a place where he just threw his hands there and said, this is impossible. Directly mapping a workplace environment is too complex. And I'll get into the resolution. How did we work around that problem in a moment? But yes, towards Kevin's question, it definitely includes your organizational culture. And I believe to a high degree, I don't know what percentage, I would do a guesstimate, but your organizational culture, especially if you look at the work of Frédéric Laloux, that talks about different color bands, very close to the spiral dynamics models for those that are familiar with it. And there is a definite difference within the environments based on those kind of cultural traits.
Thanks, Marcel. And then there's an anonymous question,
yes, please.
From someone in the group who asks, we've been doing recruiting for years and feel that we are extremely successful in the traditional means. Why would we move over to a extra assessment?
So I think there's two ways in which we can respond potentially to that question. The first response is, if you have found a lot of success during the last couple of years, then it is an absolute phenomenal position that you find yourself in, because that would not be a representation of the market average. Either you're in a very specialized field. I don't want to use the word you are lucky. I don't believe anybody is lucky. Everything we do in business is done intentional. But you know your field, you have a good pool, and you've most probably applied a lot of great principles. But again, unfortunately, that is definitely not the market average if we see what's going on, and especially not if we're talking about an 11%. So that's the one statement, and I do need to acknowledge that person and congratulate them in the quality of work they've been doing from a recruitment perspective. Yet, here's the blind side that might happen. I don't want to forecast it will happen, but the speed and the complexity of the world. We have this acronym we talk about VUCA, V-U-C-A, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, is making it more and more difficult to do predictions in a very, very diverse world based on traditional ways. That's why we are evolving, we are growing, we're adding towards that which is already working. The Shadowmatch system is not a replacement of other processes. It is an enhancement, it is an addition. And we want to use this also, obviously, in a very responsible way going forward. So please continue if you have found a lot of success up to this point. But I would invite that individual, also the anonymous person, to explore where is the world of complexity going, and might we run out of steam somewhere in the near future if we are still very fortunate in our current way.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Marcel. That is all the questions for now. You're welcome to continue. I will gather the questions again as they come in.
Thank you. So Ladies and gentlemen, if we continue back to our slideshow, and I once again, I'm thankful actually that Kevin already asked the question about the environment, because that set us up for the slide. The fact is, when we look towards just a pure environmental study of your organizational environment, it is difficult because there's so many variables. So how Mr. de Villiers got around this problem is when he realized, if you can identify a top performing individual. So who is a top performing individual? Well, it's somebody that obviously consistently performs in their performance metrics above the average. And that's why we need metrics. We need to measure performance. Many different ways. We're not going to go into that, whether it's KPIs or OKRs or a balanced score sheet or just targets and outcomes. But the person must perform above the average of their colleagues. Number two, the person must be in the job for at least 8 months. Why? Because there's a honeymoon phase, and we've got all these great endorphins running, and the serotonin levels is high, and it's energetic. Let's just get the person to a zero base again. That person must have a positive attitude towards the company, the work they are doing, because we don't want a bunch of sour prunes that might be lucky in doing a great job, but they are really terrible to work with. And then the fourth component, we're looking for a person that goes the extra mile for the team. That doesn't mean this is now a massive team player. It just basically means we don't want to reproduce individuals who completely isolate themselves from the rest of the workforce. It might mean they will completely work alone per day. That's not the problem. But an organization, by definition, means it is a collective of people coming together. If I don't fit the people also, it doesn't help we've got a star player that's a lone ranger on their own business. So there's a little bit of a criteria that we look at to see, so who are these top performers? But what we've come through the research or realized is a top performer will always be or will only be a top performer if there is a strong correlation with the environment. If the person does not fit the environment, they will not become a top performer. Yes, they might be able to do their job in a successful and a meaningful manner, but we want that match. So here's what we do. By using top performing people doing the same job in a specific environment as a recruitment, retainment, redeployment, or retirement benchmark. That is the way in which we identify the environment. So it's an indirect measurement. But ladies and gentlemen, here's the important thing. The first important key is it must be the same job. I can't use an environment benchmark for a person who's a project manager and a person, say, in the engineering environment is the drafts person. Though the environment macro of the company might be the same, the jobs are different. There are other behavioral requirements between, say, a project manager and a drafts person. Similar way, I can't go, for instance, to a local hospital and look at the medical doctor and look at the nursing staff. Two different jobs. But the second point that's very critical here is also we need to look at specific working environments. I can't take an engineering example, let's say, for instance, it's construction, and you have a Basil Reed and you have another group within the construction company, somebody like a Big in Africa, and say, well, we've got project managers on both sides. No, the environment is different. Or perhaps the environment I used earlier on, a call center agent within a Vodacom or a Telcom might be vastly different environments. You see that the technologies and the ways in which we need to think needs to respond to both of these questions. How do we benchmark the job and the environment? Both of those are now playing a critical role. And this is the beauty of where the Shadowmatch system allows us freedom and allows us space to do this in a very responsible way through an artificial intelligence process. So what is this groundbreaking automated resolution all about? Shadowmatch in a nutshell, ladies and gentlemen, is an online system. And this online system is built on an artificial intelligence engine. Now, there are many different kinds of artificial intelligence engines. The specific one, the technology is known as a fuzzy logic system, for those who are familiar with a more technical description. And if anybody wants to have more insight in the validity and also the reliability of the system was benchmarked both in South Africa and also in the United States. There is a document available on the Shadowmatch website. It's a 160-page document. It's a long statistical read that goes into all the technical details of how the system works. But in a nutshell, this system measures what we call the individual's neurologically embedded behavioral patterns, commonly known as the habits. Point number one is the neurological side. We need one profile of the mind of a person. We do that obviously indirectly by considering their behavioral patterns. But once I have a snapshot of how your mind works, how your neurology is put together, it becomes fairly simple to just correlate that neurological profile with a vast number of different applications. Whether that application is a specific job, whether that application is career guidance, whether that application is study methodologies, whether that application is relational components, whether that application is stress reporting, mental well-being, leadership and management components. I only need one snapshot of the person's brain, and then I need to correlate it with the different applications that I might want to do. This is the beauty of the Shadowmatch company also, that they have a number of research psychologists who's working on master's and PhD level and constantly doing different research projects, taking this profile, this snapshot of the person's behavioral pattern, and look at how does it play out in many different environments. And if anybody obviously is interested in doing some postgraduate research, we would gladly also even facilitate the introduction where you can take a project, some quantitative research project, and correlate your pet subject in life with a system like this. I mean, it makes for phenomenal research. The automated system then matches, and this is a nice automated function, the person's results. So we have person A with the top performers in that same job and in that same category. So whether it's again the recruitment or whether it's promotion or redeployment, I've got a benchmark per job category. And again, we will demonstrate that. And now I take the individuals and I match them to that environment to see whether there is a good correlation and a good match, both the environment and the job. By completing the Shadowmatch worksheet, the following interactive components can be used to optimize employee success. So here's the beauty. It's not just a one answer. It's not just one report. Shadowmatch system is helping us to understand many different components where we can use it. Whether it is then responsible employment, whether it is then employee support, whether it is the development of them, whether it's teams analysis, whether it's just personal fulfillment. Because a happy, fulfilled person comes to the workspace and they're engaged and they're happy and they're excited all about that. So the kind of reportings that we will be looking at, and again, we're only going to quickly glimpse over this, is for instance, a personal feedback report, a workplace match report, a personal development plan, teams optimization report, relational reports, the employee mental well-being, career guidance report, or even the latest addition to the system, an automated coaching process where the system itself coaches the individual and take them on a journey to optimize and to fit better into those environments. So ladies and gentlemen, as we are heading towards our break time also this morning, I'm quickly going to just reflect on these different work reports. And if afterwards you would like to get a copy also of our presentation, please feel free in our feedback questionnaire just to highlight that, and we will mail you through all the information. So you don't have to try and write it all down or even just take photographs. We will definitely share this. So number one, when we talk about the personal feedback report, this is a detailed automated report based on the individual's unique neurological profile, as we've said, and we call that the habits. This in-depth exploration looks at 19 behavioral categories, things like conceptual fitness, task efficiency, time utilization, and also their attitude towards work and life. That is the first and the most stock standard approach that we have. That is when a person completes the online questionnaire, they get their own personal feedback report, they can read through it. There are beautiful augmented video clips, short little video clips that explains components within the report, and the person has got a good understanding of their own habits and their own scoring. Again, after our break time, we will demonstrate one of those reports. Number two, the workplace match report. And this is where the real magic happens. Shadowmatch. Even the name is how do we match that individual report to a benchmark. The report indicates how each individual behavioral patterns match with the top performers doing the same job in the same environment. The outcome is to assist them, the recruitment, promotion, redeployment, project teams, and also succession planning. And again, we will demonstrate this also of taking an individual scores and overlaying it on the back end of a specific match. Number 3, we need to look at personal development plans. And this is just a phenomenal development process for any individual within your workspace. 20 unique online PDPs based on the 19 Shadowmatch habit categories and time management as number 20. All PDPs are action-based exercises that should be completed within the work environment. The PDPs also include a mentor accountability function where somebody can journey with the individual. During the last couple of years, Shadowmatch has even expanded on the 20 work-based PDPs to include a full set of academic-based PDPs for people who's in academic space, and also a set of 20 sport-based PDPs for people who's in professional sport or in the sport coaching arena to help them to develop the required behavioral patterns. Number 4 is the team optimization report. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this again is the beauty, because not only are we optimizing the team from a work environment, but you can also use different social teams. Perhaps it's a religious environment or a social construct environment. If the people have got their Shadowmatch report, we can look at all different kind of team functionalities. And also the next report, the relationship report, also goes way beyond just the workplace. Assessing both employees and managers to understand each member's unique position in the team. The focus is on aspects such as the team's identity, communication, conflict handling, culture, and roles. These reports can be used to maximize an existing team or then to assemble a future team. That leads us also then into this aspect of relationship report. So matching and providing a detailed feedback report for 2 individuals. And this again, my statement that I made earlier on, an example of having 2 pieces of wood, and then we try to put them together with grit, and it just doesn't work. And then we think, oh, shame. Broken people or not adequately equipped people, where it's actually got nothing to do with the individual. It's 2 beautiful people. It's the glue that brings them together that's not doing the job. And this is where the relationship reports helps us quite a lot, because it helps us to understand which areas, excuse me, which areas do the 2 individuals fit well. Their behavioral patterns are complementary and they are aligned. It also looks at which areas are different. So let's not make a big issue out of differences. Let's accept the differences. But then it's also indicating a point where we look for challenging behaviors. In the way in which I do it is most probably going to offend you to some extent. And the way, obviously, that you then do it is also going to offend my way. And if we don't have the emotional maturity or the language or the understanding of those differences, the gloves can very quickly get off and we can start fighting. I remember, for instance, and I'll tell this as one story quickly, I've been working with a very large consulting engineering company for some time. Globally, they have over 400 sites. And the HR director within the South African context phoned me and said, Marshall, we've got a major challenge between our procurement manager and our financial manager. These 2 individuals are having an open screening competition across an open desk working environment where there's a number of professional engineers sitting around. I mean, we're at a place where we're going to discipline them. They just can't work together. Can you please come and sit with them and have something of arbitration, a conflict resolution? So I got to the company, I met the 2 individuals, and very quickly realized that these are 2 healthy, beautiful individuals. They are well qualified, they are well experienced. There is no obvious reason why the 2 should not be working along. So I didn't want to dig into all the dirt, but I just asked him, in 10 minutes, give me a debrief. What do you think about the other person? And I mean, it was like the gates of hell that just opened up about how terrible the other person is. There's no integrity, they are corrupt, there's fraud, and they listed all these ethical and moral issues about how bad the other person really was. So I called a timeout and I said, ladies and gentlemen, let's just first of all get a career match, a relationship match here on the table. Let's just see how opposite or how similar you are. So the 2 of them agreed to it, and they did the relationship report, and I got the first one, which we call the work relationship report. And to my surprise, the 2 of them were very, very similar. There's similar behaviors out of the 19. I can't remember the exact figure, but I think it's like 15 or 16 were similar, which means actually they should be getting along like a house on fire. There were 1 or 2 differences, and then there were 2 challenging behaviors. So I sat them down in the debrief session and the table across each other, and I said, first to the procurement officer, I said, one of these components is your propensity towards change. Sir, I see on your pattern that you have an extraordinary high propensity to change. It is borderlining between what Shadowmatch would call a strong and a radical habit. I said, sir, talk to me a little bit about change in your day. He said, Marshall, I'm a procurement officer. We work in the global market and we buy a lot of stock. I wake up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and while I'm still actually in bed, I jump on my laptop and I look at the Asian markets and the Australasian markets, and I have to put out a bet for a couple of $1 million because we're buying up. When I get to the office, the Eastern European markets is open, and I need to make some adjustments in our buying schedules. And then I sit the whole day and I track what's happening through Europe and Africa. Late afternoon, the Americas have woken up, and I start looking at the East Coast. And just before I go to bed, most of the time we've got the western coast of America going, which is about 9 hours behind us in schedule, and I need to adjust. So I usually make about 4 or 5 adjustments per day on a couple of $1 million purchases that we're doing. I said, that kind of makes sense. Great responsibility. So I looked at the financial manager and I said, man, I see your pattern for propensity to change is extraordinarily low. Actually, in Shadowmatch terms, it's between a plan and a necessary behavior. Please chat to me about how does your day look? And she said, Marshall, it's a typical day. I'm a financial manager like most environments. I give oversight to debtors and creditors. I have financial reporting. It's a highly routine way. And, we go through the motions. And my greatest job is to make sure my people do the job according to the set standards. I said, how much change do you experience in your day-to-day? She said, well, it's quite the opposite. My job is actually to ensure that we do not bring change, but we follow the stock standard procedures. I said, okay, that makes sense. I said, sir, ma'am, who's right and who's wrong? The two of you are clashing because the one person says, you can never trust him because he always changes his mind, and you can never take him at his word because what he says right now, 10 minutes later, it's going to change. And the other person says, but you are stuck up. You can't have any progression. You can't move anywhere. But you are talking from your perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, the outcome of that conversation was quite phenomenal. They got the opportunity to start understanding each other's behavioral perspective through the relationship report, the work relationship report, and to understand that no one is right and no one is wrong. Look, they didn't walk out their best friends and all of a sudden sing Kumbaya, and now we're going to be the best of teams. But there was a very, very negative situation where a work relationship report helped us to bring insight into the differences, and they could at least view each other's point of view through different eyes. And this is where the relationship reports are so beautiful. So whether it's a work relationship report, a lecturer or a student, whether it's a love report, a marriage report, a friendship report, cohabitation, family, parent, child, there are 8 different reports, and all of these are quite great to help us to understand these kind of relationships. Number 6, career.
Marcel,
Yes,
just quickly before you go to the career guidance report, Kevin asked another brilliant question over here, where he said that traditionally one advertises for a position, receives a load of CVs. I'm reminded of that one organization we worked with that advertised the position and received, 1,000 CVs. And in today's circumstances, you vet them, you go through all the CVs, you shortlist, you interview, and then assess and hopefully appoint someone that will stick. So his question is, do you recommend that all applicants do the Shadowmatch assessment and then shortlist and then interview in order to shorten the process, or how would you approach it?
Very, very good question. And let's take it while the question is hot on the table. So there is obviously a flow. The flow or the progression is usually you need to have the job description. So what are we looking for? Part of that, what are we looking for, is to understand what is the environment. So right at the start, I would do a Shadowmatch assessment with the top performers that is in that same role, because as much as I need to have the job description, remember our little triangle, I also need to know how does my top performers engage the environment. So that's step number 1. I've not yet worked with potential recruitees or anything, but I've done my background check to say job spec, environmental spec. Step number 2, get the CV. So now I do it via a social media platform or recruitment agent or whatever drive you have. Now I get the CVs. So Lawrence, yeah, I always laugh. You know, we had that one job of 1,000. I can put it on the table because it was one of our prisons here in Pretoria that had 26,000 paper-based CVs that was on the table in the boardroom when I walked in there one day when we started working with them. 26,000, and they had 5 positions available. So when I asked the HR manager, how do you do that? He just kind of smiled and laughed at me. And I'm not even going to say anything else. So that was one of our major prisons that I found. Next step, we need to vet the CVs based on skill. Skill is the first and foremost thing I must check. Let me give you an example. One of my best friends is a plastic surgeon here in Pretoria. And it happens that my behavioral patterns, my Shadowmatch profile and his Shadowmatch profile are very, very similar. He's got a doctorate degree. I've got a doctorate degree. But I do not have the skill of his doctorate degree to walk into an operating theater, pick up the scalpel, and start cutting on people. So irrespective if I have a very good Shadowmatch profile, if I don't have the skill, the person can't do the job. So that's the first step when I vet the CVs. Go through the CVs, and everything that is not related to the skill or relevant to the skill, remove that. So now I've got a short list. So let's say you had 100 CVs, 50 of those CVs, I'm just using a random number, is not skilled. What's the next step? Now I've got 50 CVs with the skill. For those 50 individuals, I send out the Shadowmatch code. Half of those people most probably is not even going to respond and do the code because they're sending their CVs out to every possible place just looking for a job. But 25 people might come back and actually complete it. I will demonstrate after our break how beautiful Shadowmatch then automatically rank all of those people. We do know they've got the skill. And then we're looking for what we call anything above a 4 or a 5 out of 10 match with the environment. So if you have a long list of, say, 200 or 300 people, take the cut. I know they've got the skill. I take only my 10s, 9s, and 8s, and I'm going to invite them, and that's the next step for the interviews. So Shadowmatch is a phenomenal way also of a sifting mechanism. First skill, then we look towards the environment, then bring them in for the interview, or obviously if you've got other evaluations also. So Lawrence, I hope that responds to the question also that was asked.
Definitely does. Thanks, Marcel.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap up this section. We've spoken about the relationship reports. The next outcome that we are looking for is the career guidance report. And this is one of the most groundbreaking research projects. There was over 10 educational psychologists that over the last 6 years worked with Shadowmatch. And UNISA, the University of South Africa, was the major space where they did the research. Every year since 2016, about 350,000 students in the UNISA environment is using the system. It was the first full-fledged university that started introducing it. And also we are actively campaigning right now with more than 400 universities around the globe that we're engaging to obviously introduce the system into that spaces also. This coming week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, for instance, I'm talking at the Middle Eastern Thought Leadership Conference with all the universities in the Middle Eastern world together, heads of states, etc., etc. Quite exciting also to have an opportunity as a keynote speaker within that space. But what this does, it provides the person with an automated, interactive, audiovisually stimulating career guidance report. It's one thing if you stay in a major city, you've got educational psychologists around you, but what about Pofadder and Pitsonnewater and Springbok, where we don't have those individuals? Then this career guidance report becomes so phenomenal to reach, again, the masses. The report considers various categories of Industry 4 enabled career-related aspects. There's very few systems right now on the market in the career guidance space that is geared towards Industry 4. Most of the classical systems on career guidance is still Industry 3 standards. It looks at elements then of the person's short, medium, and long-term vocational objectives and a lot of different components. The career guidance report, ladies and gentlemen, is really a phenomenal piece of work. Number 7, employee mental well-being. And obviously, we're all reading the newspaper articles and the BizTechs and the stuff. It seems that our people's mental well-being is falling apart more and more by the day. As human capital consultants, most of my day goes towards structuring of companies, mergers and acquisitions, strategies and culture. But more and more, I'm getting involved again on a personal level with things like personal resilience and emotional agility, and you kind of pointing people into different areas of trauma therapy and counsel. There's a variety of different workshops that we connect with the report based on the person's then unique behavioral pattern. We also have a predictive index. The workshop's outcomes is first to assist the employees to optimize their neurological health. We look at things like strengthening their emotional capacity, how to integrate work and life, as well as building a good, solid resilience platform. And then finally, we've got what we call the automated coaching process. It's a revolutionary coaching platform where an artificial intelligence system becomes the coach. With a wide selection of programs, and there's continuously new programs being added. It ranges from behavioral coaching, career coaching, fulfillment coaching, and performance coaching. And this most probably is going to become one of the most attractive components in the Shadowmatch system, or the bouquet, also going towards the future. So ladies and gentlemen, to end off our slideshow presentation and also leading us into our break time, I'm always just fascinated by General Eric Shinsky's statement that we might not like all these changes that we are seeing. But here's the reality: we're going to dislike the irrelevance even more. Or as he just say, you're going to like irrelevance even less. The world is changing. That is a fact. Some areas are changing very rapidly. Areas are changing bit by bit, step by step, perhaps not that quickly. I'm not familiar with your environment and how change might be happening there, but what I do know is change is inevitable for all of us. So, ladies and gentlemen, if there's any person that would like to get in contact with me also and have a further chat or a discussion about the Shadowmatch system, you're most welcome to follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn. Send us an email address, my personal cell phone number also in there. So this is my contact details. And again, at the end of today's conference, I will again share this if anybody also wants to be connected with us in this conversation. So on my schedule now, it is exactly 11:30. It's 1 hour into our conference. We will be taking a 10-minute break till 22:11. We're not going to close the conference. We're just going to mute, and you're welcome to switch off also just your camera. I will start promptly again at 22:11. The second half of this conference, I will be going into actual Shadowmatch profile. First of all, just to give everybody an idea of how a profile looks. Second of all, how a benchmark functionality works. And then third of all, we will look at structuring the Shadowmatch system within a company. Lawrence, do we have a final question or a comment perhaps before we take our break?
Oh, Marcel, and if you're willing to take a question before the break, there is one.
Why not?
Once again from Kevin, who says large employers who have the resources and recruiters are using AI to filter CVs. So depending on how your CV is compiled and depending on the words that you use, these systems either accept or reject your CV to be put forward. What are your comments to this?
Again, the world of automation is in very early stages. There's a lot of errors, there's a lot of mistakes, there's a lot of good Afrikaans oopsies that AI also makes along the way. But if you have 26,000 CVs and you manually have to go through it and write in a grid versus you can put it all into an automated process, I mean, there's no question asked about that. We're not asking why automation. I think that's a fairly straightforward answer. We're just asking how. And most probably for the next 10 years, we will see how all of those systems mature, how they, filter out all the little problems. To give a very practical example, automated cars. I'm very scared on the South African road. One day they're going to introduce an automated car. But the reality is there will be car accidents. But the reality is also there'll most probably be much less car accidents than what we're currently seeing with human intervention when it comes to driving cars in a country like South Africa. So I'm very positive about it and taking into realization that there are still much errors. The nice thing about Shadowmatch is via API technology. Quite frequently, Shadowmatch is built right into some of those systems. Shadowmatch has got their own IT development team. So if the platform is accessible or there's a back end, Shadowmatch can nicely fit into those things. Or if the automated process helps us to make a shortlist, then we just go into the AI system of Shadowmatch and we send out the Shadowmatch codes from there. So there are many different applications, again, how we can do that.
Brilliant, Marcel. Thanks.
Thank you, Lawrence. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pausing our conference call. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome you back to the second part of our conference today, where we explore different mechanisms. We want to enhance the propensity towards success for all of our employees and our workforce also. I am again reminded of a very famous statement that Richard Branson said, and I know it's very controversial from certain perspectives, but in his point of view, he says, number one, I take care of my people. Number two, my people will take care of my customers. And number three, if the customers are happy, then my shareholders will be happy. And it's a reprioritization that we are seeing in the world of work across the globe at this point in time, where the people component is really taking a more central focus than what traditional notions of business might have said, maximizing the shareholder value or just the bottom line financial profitability, where we say, but hang on a minute, perhaps just if my people are happy and engaged and enjoying, that all of those other things will be natural consequences of that. And again, Shadowmatch is not the alpha and the omega. Shadowmatch is an add-on. It's an addition that will help us to understand, how do we ensure that? How do we secure, going forward in a more healthy and a responsible way, working with our people? So ladies and gentlemen, for me, this is the exciting part. The first section dealt a lot with the theory behind it and the changes we're seeing, and obviously what I come to appreciate, the principle of habitat and how we really need to understand this within our workspace. So what we're going to do in the second part is to go live into the Shadowmatch system. So I'm going to do a screen share where I'll be going live into the system to just demonstrate some of these functionalities that we need to consider. So ladies and gentlemen, for purposes of this presentation, I'm using a demo folder within CCI Professional's own environment. And the reason for this is obviously I will not share live information of other companies or clients that we have in our data space. So this is mock data that we use. Some of the mock data is accurate. For instance, my own profile and Lawrence's profile is lying around somewhere in the folders. But let's say, for instance, this is a company. We call it CCI Pro. And CCI Pro is a stock standard company. They have a finance department. And our finance department, we see, have 4 individuals in them. We have a human resource department with 5 people. We have a logistics department with 4 people, management, marketing, project administrators, project managers who are candidates, and then project managers who are seniors. So 2 different descriptions perhaps in a job title, and then sales. Ladies and gentlemen, again, this is just a mock company that we set up for purposes of demonstration. Now, first of all, if I go into a folder, for instance, a management folder, I get a lot of different functionalities. And unfortunately, due to the time of this conference, we can't really go into any of all the more advanced functionalities. Again, any user of the system gets free online training on the system to make sure that they are happy. But basically, I can go into a folder that will show me who are all the employees. So the employees in here is Mr. Lawrence Delport, yours truly, your host for the day. Myself also, Roxanne Mancini, Mr. Toby Nell, and then Mr. Louis van der Vijver. Again, these are mock figures that we put in here. We have then asked the question as we demonstrate to say, so who's potentially the top performers? So if you have your performance metrics, you know that you've made the criteria, we will move those individuals into what we call a benchmark folder. So for this exercise, we've said Lawrence, Roxanne, and Louis will be our benchmark top performing managers, which means myself and my fellow manager, which is in this case Mr. Nell, will be part of the management team, which are now busy in a growth and a development phase. Let's first of all start off by just looking at a specific profile. So I'm going to open the results here on my own profile just to give an indication of what you would typically see. This is a typical Shadowmatch profile graph. We have got 19 different behavioral patterns. Those are the color ones. Just for a start, please ignore the gray ones. That's the benchmark that I'll get to in a moment. And the different behavioral patterns that it measures ranges from my propensity to own, my propensity to hand off, or just commonly called how to delegate, simplification, resilience, propensity to change, frustration handling, team and individual inclination, my self-motivation, in other words, whether it's intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, routine, problem solving, responsiveness, innovation, people positivity, discipline, conflict handling, altruism. If you're unfamiliar with that term, it basically means self-sacrifice for the better of other people, self-confidence, and then leadership. These are the stock standard 19 behavioral patterns. And we can also change the view in how we consider it, because some people look at it and feel, man, I don't score high, so I'm not very good. No. When you change the view to a more active and a passive view, we come to the realization that it's not whether you are scoring high or low. That would be a quantitative indexing. Like we're all accustomed, for instance, an IQ score or a test that you've written in school or university, where the higher you get, the better you are. Shadowmatch works on the principle rather to say, what category does your behavior belong to? And I'll talk more about the category. So we can look at the active or the passive side of the behavioral pattern, because the question is not how strong it is. The question is, what does the environment require of you? If you, for instance, go back towards a pattern of self-confidence. Now, you would see that self-confidence is my strongest pattern at 65. The question is not whether that's good or bad. The question is, what is the environment in which I'm functioning? Ladies and gentlemen, I do a lot of public speaking. I walk into boardrooms and executive rooms with very qualified and experienced people. If I don't have a high degree of self-confidence, I will struggle in my work. But let's say, for instance, you take my self-confidence and you put it into a helicopter pilot, where the person say, listen, I'm very confident. Irrespective of what the weather is, it can rain, hail, storm, I know how to fly a plane. I'm confident in my own skills. And what happens? I most probably crash the plane, because any pilot will tell you that their confidence is not the issue. Their ability to follow the rules and the regulations and the protocols is the major focus area. So in one environment, the self-confidence might serve me well. In another environment, it might be a bit of a challenge. Again, if I use another example like innovation, is it good to have high innovation or low innovation? Well, it depends what's the context. If you're working, say, for instance, now in the coronavirus research laboratories of the world with Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, we require a very high level degree of innovation because it's out of the box thinking, new mRNA technologies, etc., etc. If you're perhaps in the more legislative environment, or for instance, a chartered accountant that need to do internal or external auditing, and you want to start becoming creative and take adventurous leaps, you're most probably going to run into problems. Or as one CA once said, Marcel, if we become innovative, we get locked up. So in this case, it's not about how strong or how soft the pattern. The question is, what is the environment looking for? Again, also our behavioral patterns can be categorized in different specific components. We can look, for instance, towards what we call your task or object handling patterns. These have to do with the way in which we execute work. We can look at the ideas components, and obviously, guys, as an executive consultant and researcher, there are some of my ideas that are very strong. Then there's the internal drivers. These are the things going on inside of us. And then there are the people-related habits and how strong those environments are calling towards us. Different views, same set of patterns. Additional to this, it also looks at things like conceptual fitness. It looks at task efficiency. And then it also looks at our attitude and how we approach the world, whether we are involved, uninvolved, unaggressive, which is more a compliant way of looking at the world, or a more assertive, aggressive kind of approach. So ladies and gentlemen, this is a stock standard approach. On the Shadowmatch YouTube channel, there are a number of different video clips that explains this in a lot more detail. I'm not going to go through every behavioral pattern and highlight what it means. I'm just providing something of an oversight. I made this statement that it's not about the quantity of the pattern. In other words, how high or how low the score is, but rather the quality. This is also two different domains of psychometric evaluations, the qualitative and quantitative domain. Qualitative scores is rather like a blood test. I don't find out whether my blood test is good or bad. What I do find out is whether my blood belongs to which category, A, B, O, positive, negative. Similar to Shadowmatch, we have categories here. That's the little round circles. You have what we call planned behavior. This is a behavior that does not have any patterns within our mind. It takes a lot of planning and preparation and a lot of effort if you're required to do that. Second one is what we call necessary behavior. It's a little bit easier, but I am still forced to do it. And quite frankly, I don't want to do it too much. Like, for instance, in my patterns, you can see both routine and individual inclination is there. I can do routine, but I really don't like it. Individual inclination, it tires me out. But I do know there's sometimes I need to do things by myself. Then we get into contextual habits. Contextual habits is healthy for the mind because you're very actively thinking. The potential downfall is you can potentially procrastinate because you're thinking too much. But it is a habitual pattern. You're pretty much on overdrive or autopilot already. Then we get more towards the purple one, strong habits. This is when a person is pretty much set in their ways. Doesn't depend on the context. You know, you can expect this is the way the person is going to function and operate. And then lastly, also, even when we get to a radical habit, where the habit becomes so strong that the behavior actually controls the person and the person no longer have control over the behavior. Again, certain environments might require that. If we are working, for instance, in an ER unit of a hospital and you look towards responsiveness, the assumption is that the ER staff will have a responsiveness level of at least 65 because they never know when those ambulance doors open up, whether it's a person that's going to climb out or whether it's a bucket and a mop for all practical purposes in an ER unit. They have milliseconds sometimes to make decisions that is going to be the difference between saving a life or that person passing away on that bed. Responsiveness must be radical within that environment if we want to cope with it. So again, the question is, what is the environment asking of us? So now that we've identified our three top performers, again, Lawrence, Roxanne, Louis, we put them into a folder. And the folder immediately looks towards the benchmark and say, listen, is this benchmark working? So this is a grouping together of the benchmark individuals to give us now that shadow on the background. It gives us a 90% stability factor, which means 90% of these people's behavioral patterns are overlapping. And then it adds this additional area, which we call the critical match. The critical match are the 5 patterns which our benchmark individuals use the most. In other words, it's the strongest. In this specific study, it might be problem solving, resilience, frustration handling, responsiveness, and propensity to own. The reason for this is we're working from the theory that our top performers will most probably be functioning 6, 7, or even a full 8-hour day using their strongest patterns because the environment demands it, because they like doing it. That's why they are the top performers within that environment. So for us, even sometimes when the overall match is not perfect, but the critical match is a very good match, we would still consider to employ or promote or redeploy that individual. Similar, we now have a conceptual fitness benchmark, a task efficiency benchmark, and an attitude graph benchmark. So this is the benchmark now that our management team, for instance, and our little company, CCI Pro, would demonstrate. When I now go back to my employees, I can now immediately see what the score is. The 2 employees that's in this folder, Mr. Nell and Mr. Hutton, it is obvious that Mr. Nell is the better choice to fit the environment as he is a 7 out of 10 match, and Mr. Hutton is perhaps not such a strong option because he is a 4 out of 10. Well, we still need to manually go and expect also. So it would tell me here, again, the benchmark stability is 90%. The overall match is 85%, which is still a good match. It's not a cross where we say it's a mismatch. But again, when we look towards the critical match, which is a 90% match for us, that's very positive. Meaning if Mr. Hutton should be doing that job, he would most probably be using his own patterns, which is natural to him, in a lot of the time. Conceptual fitness, Mr. Hutton might get a bit frustrating because he wants to work more conceptually, where the benchmark shows towards the fact that there are more operational aspects also and technical work that needs to be done. Their task efficiency is very much in alignment, and the attitude graphs also very similar. We do see Mr. Hutton showing a little bit more of quadrant 1 and definitely more of quadrant 2, but it is still a fairly good match. So the system tells us overall it's a 4 out of 10. Why? There's one red light conceptually. There is perhaps a little bit of a mismatch within that conceptual space. Managers, again, have got about a 70% conceptual inclination and a 30% more technical operational inclination. Mr. Hutton, a little bit of a nerd, so I can speak on behalf of him. He's not going to get mad at me. He likes doing research. He likes working with ideas and conceptual. And he's done the test many times, so he knows the questions or the answers to the question also, and that's most probably why he's scoring 10 out of 10 these days. But in any case, not to mock myself too much, this is still a proposition if there are no other choices. But again, it's most probably that Mr. Nell would be the better choice. So ladies and gentlemen, that is how we consider a benchmark. Let me show you some more ideas. Within the context of our candid project managers, we now have 3 benchmark individuals. We added them to that specific folder, and we will look now at their benchmark stability. 89%, 91%, we have a 6 out of 10, a task efficiency of 41, and a beautiful attitude graph. The system also tells us it is a perfect benchmark, and we can use it as it is. Now, I've shortlisted my CVs, and I have 6 applicants. They're not yet in the employee folder. They are all now applicants, and I want to bring 2 candid project managers on board. Immediately, I would just sift them to say I've got a 5 out of 10 match, a Mr. Krieger, there's a Mrs. Kaiser, and I've got a Mrs. Nkosi also. These are the 3 individuals that I would most probably bring in for the interviews. The other 3, they are 2s and 1 out of 10. I'm drawing my line, say, at a 4. And obviously, if you have even stronger candidates, I will only bring in them. So now I can work with the individuals. And during the interview, if I open up, for instance, Mr. Krieger's element, the system then provides me with a fully integrated, what we call interview package. I'm not going to go through the whole interview package, but I can open up the interview system. And what is nice about the interview system is when I create the pack, it already generates the questions for me. I don't have to go and thumb up the typical questions that we would ask, but the questions is generated based on the discrepancies now between Mr. Krieger's results and the benchmark. And I can specifically drill into those components. For instance, Mr. Krieger is working much quicker. Is that going to cause frustration that the rest of the team or the job is a little bit slower? Or, for instance, Mr. Krieger's altruism is significantly stronger than our candid project manager. Might that be a problem? And we can explore that. So again, the integrated interview system helps us a lot. So this is the way in which we can do responsible recruitment and also use these results. But let's say, for instance, I do perhaps know one of these individuals. Right at the bottom, we have a Mrs. Zimmerman. We know Mrs. Zimmerman is a hard worker. We know she is efficient. We know also that Mrs. Zimmerman is a person that will fit our company culture and our values. But she's not going to be a good candidate project manager. But we want to employ her. So now the interesting thing is because I've got benchmarks on all the different functions, I can go to what we call a multi-match functionality. And I can take Mrs. Zimmerman's scores and I can benchmark her scores against all the different benchmarks and see, but is there an environment where she might fit in much better? And lo and behold, Mrs. Zimmerman is a 7 out of 10 match with our finance department. She's also a 6 out of 10 match with the marketing department. So I'm going to pick up the phone and say, Mrs. Zimmerman, please can I have a conversation with you? The reality is you're only a 2 out of 10 match with our candid project management benchmark. But it does seem that you fit our marketing department and our finance department very well. Have you ever considered perhaps following a career and a path towards finance or towards marketing? Because we really want to bring you on board. Perhaps we are fortunate and lucky and the person say, well, I love your company. I want to go and work for CCI Pro, but I don't have any skill. Well, that's no problem. We can find you a mentor. We've got some top performers. We can send you on some short skill courses, perhaps a CETA course, perhaps a formal qualification at university. We will sponsor you. Because if you're a 7 out of 10 match with our finance benchmark, it tells us that you will be a fish that will swim in very, very comfortable waters within that space. We want to invest in you. So this is a way in which we can take an individual and match them with the organization to say, but can we find a spot for the individual? The beauty of this process is the fact that we can also do it the other way around. Let's say, for instance, we have now our managers and we say we've got our management benchmark and we want to see, do we have any potential management quality talent within the company? We go to our multi-match functionality, and we want to say, we want to take every individual that's specifically in this company, and we want to match them to the benchmark. And lo and behold, we've got a couple of very strong candidates. We have a Mr. Fouchier, who's working in our human resource department. He's a 9 out of 10 match with a management benchmark. We have Mr. Krieger, who's now in the candidate project management. And though he's very young, we do know there is a talent pipeline that we can start building from him. In logistics, we've got a Ms. Myberg that's working there. We also have a Mr. Tanton that's working in sales, and Mrs. Buerta, and now we can start going to the 8 out of 10. So the beauty in this process is the fact that we now also have a predictive indexing, not only for new recruits, but also in our current pipeline, who will be able to fit those various roles and responsibilities. And this obviously makes very excitement for our talent management processes also within the company. So ladies and gentlemen, these are some of the functionalities that we have within the system. Again, our system has got a number of different reports, which I will demonstrate in a moment. But let me quickly pause here. Lawrence, are there any questions or comments or thoughts that we want to add here now that I've kind of just demonstrated a lot of the actual functionalities of the system?
Yeah, Marcel, there's one anonymous question first that says, does Shadowmatch comply with S8 of the Employee Equity Act, which stipulates that psychological testing and other similar tests has to be certified by the Health Professional Council of South Africa or any other body which may be authorized by law to certify those tests as assessments into S2 of the Health Professions Act?
Yeah, so that is obviously a very nice legislative conversation. So the AI system itself cannot be, can I say, legislated because it doesn't require human interpretation. So the moment you have a psychometrist or a psychologist that needs to interpret the results, then the Act requires the test must be registered. Because the system itself interprets the data and does the matching, that is not a requirement. So it is not officially in the psychometric domain. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, we want managers and human practitioners to work with the system themselves. We don't want a company having to go through a registered person to use that. The second component is registration in the long run doesn't mean a lot. The only thing that matters is what is the validity and what is the reliability of a system. Whether it's got a stamp of approval chap by the Health Council profession is not the outcome we are looking for here. The outcome is the system valid? System validity is at 86%, and on a reliability level, it's been correlated with a number of other systems. Again, all of those research papers are available on the Shadowmatch website. So this system can and has been used within all the spaces of recruitment, and also in the Employment Equity Act, it can be used. It's not a problem because it's an AI system. It's no longer a human practitioner that is interpreting the data on that behalf. And the validity from the research base is, well, if you know where the average is, the American Psychological Institute accept the validity from 40%. In other words, if it's 60% invalid, it is still acceptable norm within the US. At an 86%, this is an exceptionally stable and valid system to use within that space.
I trust that the individual who asked that question feels that it has been answered. If it has not, please just let me know what part of the question was not answered, and I will just ask it again to Dr. Hutton. Ilse in the chat asks, assuming that employees would have to regularly do this assessment then.
Good question, Ilse. So it's all about the application of the system. So here's some of the actual facts. The system is going to block you per email code, because you're connected via email code, to not do the evaluation more frequently than every 12 months. So you need time to develop and to grow behavioral patterns. And also, we don't want the people to get too accustomed to the kind of questions. But again, there are various questions. It's not a stock standard set of questions. The system generates different versions of the questions along the way. But from an application point of view, not less than 12 months. But if you implement the system, we recommend to all of our clients, in any case, that they reevaluate anything between 12 and 18 months cycle. So just to use the example in CCI Professional, every 12 months, we reevaluate the entire CCI Professional fold with both our team members and all of our associates. and that's coming up now in November. So we do it just before the December holidays, that people have time to consider, reflect, and all of that. Every year, we update our benchmarks because there are people that leave, there are new top performers that comes into play, and we make sure that we constantly use the system as a reference point within both the performance management, but also within the learning and development outcomes of our employees. Again, also, when we come to the costing models, there are various different costing models, but the kind of models that we use, like subscription models, gives us the liberty and the flexibility to do this every 12 months with the whole company. And we would really recommend that also.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcel. Here, Ilse just replied, thank you. What about the rare event that it is a new company? We do not have top performers yet. Are there any options for setting up benchmarks in this situation? Brilliant question, Ilse. I want to see how this answers this.
Indeed, Mr. Delport is the managing director of an entrepreneurial incubator called The Foundry also. So, Lawrence, this is something that's more towards your domain, but I'll respond still, because any young entrepreneur doesn't have any benchmarks of any sort. But let me broaden the question perhaps just a little bit. You need a minimum of 2 people to set up a benchmark, which means in any normal organization, 10 to 15% of the jobs you have will not have more than 2 people. So you can't put up a benchmark. Take, for instance, just the CEO. There's only one CEO per company. So there will always be environments where we cannot put together a benchmark in-house. There's 2 options. Either we can follow the environmental argument, where we say, let's try and find other individuals in the company that does a very similar job. But we know there is a discrepancy because it's a different job, but the environment in which they're doing it is fairly similar. That's the one route. The other argument is say, no, we're rather going to follow the job-specific environment. When we do that, we go back to Shadowmatch, we give them a phone call and say, Shadowmatch, you've got 3 million profiles and more than 100,000 benchmarks. We've got a company, it's a 25 company with IT programmers doing software developers, and they've got sales guys on the board. They either don't have top performers or they are too small. This is the parameters. Can you go through the benchmark and put up what we call a generic benchmark? The generic benchmark will be very truthful to the kind of job they do, but it will be a different environment. So we try and do similar SME size, major corporate, multinational, local startup, old company. There's a couple of questions they ask, but they then help us to do a generic benchmark, and they do it for us for $1,000 rand. I mean, it's absolutely nothing. It's just a little bit of time and effort. They import it into your Shadowmatch folder, and then you've got the generic benchmark. I can give you one example. I'm working with a credit company, and they have a number of new salespersons. So they started employing people based on their own benchmark, and then the CEO phoned me and said, Marcel, we're not getting good salespeople. Our sales targets are not being met. So I said, sir, what's your benchmark? He said, well, I took my 2 top performing sales guys. I said, are you happy with them? No, actually, I'm not happy with them. They're not making sales targets also. I said, but that's a problem. Because if your benchmark is wrong or inaccurate, you are measuring against the wrong thing. I said, let's phone Shadowmatch. Let's give them your parameters and let them draw up a generic benchmark of salespeople, cold calling, financial industry. So they did it for us. So we matched the 2 top performers. It was a 1 out of 10 and a 2 out of 10 match that the company's top performers, their previous benchmark, actually matched against the generic benchmark. So they sent out about 50 codes. They got people who were 7, 8, 9 out of 10 matches. They very quickly realized those guys comes with a price tag. They want to negotiate their packages, and they brought some of them on board, and their sales targets just absolutely skyrocketed. And that's a case study that we're busy putting together at this point in time. There are many case studies, even visual case studies, like King Price and their call center. Mr. De Villiers' own daughter, who's an industrial psychologist, worked with the King Price call center case study, and there are many of them also on the Shadowmatch website. So definitely there are options for the environments where we do not have enough people for the benchmark. Lawrence, any other thoughts or comments from our participants?
Not at this time. Ilse just says, thank you for the interesting comment that you made. Thanks.
Great pleasure. So ladies and gentlemen, what I will be going through is just show you some ideas of these reports that we've been speaking about. So let me jump back into, for instance, the management folder. Again, I will use myself comfortably here as an example. So what I can do is I can, for instance, under the report, get just the normal results, and that's the one that you are seeing on the screen live here. I can look even towards the time graph to see if the person say, yeah, this happened, that happened. Well, we can see where the time problems or estimates was. There's a report. Then I can draw just an intro report. If I quickly want to scan over it, what are the major habits and going on it? In other words, I don't want to do a lot of reading. I can pull the full report. And the full report obviously now gives me a good indication of how this person would look. And then the reports we start using more often, first of all, is the matching report. The matching report has got a little bit of a bite in it. It's written for the HR practitioners in the work. It's not for the candidate. And it tells us outright, listen, we need to be careful. This guy's self-confidence is too strong, his propensity to change is too strong, and he's going to hand off too much work. And it then goes through the whole report, and it makes our recommendation at the end. You can PDF the document very quickly, circulate it also in your team, or upload it. But then it's got the work match report. And the work match report is written in a very soft language. So once I've seen the employee, I give them the work match report, and they also now see, why did we bring the person in? Where do they need to grow? Where do they need to develop? And if we then take this employee and we actually employ them, then we immediately start to activate a personal development plan. Because a personal development plan, so in this case, it locked me into self-confidence. Doesn't give me options, sorry. Let me just go for another option. I want to show you just the options that it will potentially give us. So it gives me all those personal development plans, and then it highlights resilience and self-confidence as the two best options. Should we bring Mr. Nell into this conversation? So immediately from recruitment or promotion, I already go into the development of that person's behavioral patterns. And again, if I use a report like the work match report, it puts it very softly in very nice layman terms, encouraging and inspiring the person in order to do that. Additional, then we can look at the full pack. That's the interview pack, the career report, and also the study report. Though this conference does not go into the detail of all the other elements, I do quickly just want to highlight that the portal that I did open now is a dashboard that every single person that completed Shadowmatch will receive. And the dashboard remains active. They can continue to buy additional reports, like for instance, then a marriage report, should they want to get one of those reports. So if I go to the relationship section, the work report, friendship report, love, family, and all of that, which would serve even as a report outside of just a normal working context. They can also, for instance, if the company doesn't provide a career report and they say, but hang on a minute, I want to look at my own career report, they can go and buy it for basically 300 Rand. And there's various online payment options. The career report, again, shows us very nice little sections with video embedded that explains my specific report. It gives me a couple of very nice indicators also, for instance, on my, my positionings, whether it's working with people, objects, tasks, ideas, stability of careers. It's looking at practical or theoretical aspects, complexity of careers, career tips, the kind of environment that I need to work in and that I need to process. And then one of the greatest elements is what we call the career test, where we can go in and see where there are certain good matches. For instance, CEO environment is a brilliant match for me. Executive consultant, strong match. I've been in the world of ministry for many, many years. The reason I'm not full-time in ministry is the reason I'm only a 49% match. I'm also in the world of academics, only a 49% match. That's why I've never become a full-time academic. And also in the entrepreneurial space, I do also build companies. 62% is a fairly good match. And this helps me also to help to guide my staff members in their own career choices to build that. If you perhaps have younger people around and they want to do, for instance, a study process, whether it's school, just by the way, the system is validated from a grade 8 level learner, which is about 14 years of age. So whether it's a high school pupil or a student at university, very good also to look at the study report. And again, nice little videos that's embedded into this. So the reporting section for us is a very important functionality, and constantly there are new reports that's being authored and that's being added to the section. Lawrence, any questions that popped up in the meantime on the reporting side, perhaps? Nothing at this point in time. Great. So ladies and gentlemen, I will go very quickly into the final functionality of the team report. I set up a specific team demo also. The team report works, obviously, the backbone comes out of our 19 behavioral patterns, but it now provides a little bit of a different view. This radar or spider diagram looks like a watch, a wristwatch, that's got 12 different positions. And these 12 different positions also stands a little bit in opposition towards each other, whether we are actively exploring or whether we're following existing structure and discipline, whether we are quick and efficient, or whether we have accuracy and attention to detail, working with change or maintaining the known, collaborative or comprehensive versus independent and individualistic, people preference towards task and material, and then it highlights our top 5, or rather bottom 5 most cautious behavior for this team, which in this case would be propensity to hand off, routine, individual inclination, conflict handling, and team inclination, and also our top 5 strongest behavioral patterns for this team: problem solving, responsiveness, frustration handling, resilience, and self-confidence. Again, what is nice, we get the average score of the team, so we understand how the team function. But now again, we can look at every individual where we can switch on their specific profile and see how does the individual relate to the team. Because unlike the matching functionality where everybody does the same job, in a team, by definition, we have different jobs. The mere fact, even if the operations of the team is the same, we have a team leader whose job is different than the rest of the team. So now I want to see which areas are there good alignment and which areas are there potential misalignment. This helps us in conflict again, it helps us in communication and other consideration. We can also take 2 different individuals, like for instance myself and Lawrence, and we can start looking at the differences and the overlapping areas of how these individuals work well together or where there's challenges. The team strength overall is strong. You can predict the team upfront, whether it's dysfunctional or just functional when necessary, or whether their team is then strong or even very strong. It also helps us to understand different roles that we need to do in the team, whether it's an anchoring role, a people role, an action and task role. We've got no cautious people in this group. The problem solvers, who's the adventurer and the change agents, and independent. And then the report again gives us a lot more detail of the individuals and how they can function within these various spaces. So ladies and gentlemen, this again is not a comprehensive view of all the functionalities within Shadowmatch. This is a brief introduction to the system. Again, every one of the practitioners, we train you to use the system. It's a quick 2 or 3 hour online training. You get your own portal, you log in, you work with your specific work environment. We are there to support and to help you to make certain interpretations when you have, can I say, more complex algorithms. But in the end, we encourage that everybody drives their own system. We don't want to do that on your behalf. We're not there to become an emotional crutch to the workspace. We want the automation to do everything that needs to be done. Again, also, new technologies, new reports, new functionalities is continuously being added, and that makes the bouquet of Shadowmatch such a valid proposition for people who wants to explore how to optimize the different environments. So ladies and gentlemen, that brings me to the end of my formal presentation, also the demonstration of the system. There are beautiful, great video clips available, animated video clips on the Shadowmatch website. I'm not going to show all of that, but you're welcome to look at all of these functionalities also from an animated position. But Lawrence, back to you for any further questions, comments, concerns that we have as we start wrapping up.
Marcel, thank you so much. There are no questions currently in the chat box, so if anyone still does have a question, you're more than welcome to quickly get your last questions in before we do conclude this session. But there are no questions at this time, Marcel.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also ask from my side, if there's just general thoughts that you would want to add about the Shadowmatch system, you are most welcome. We will be in contact from our side with all the individuals post this workshop also and this conference to ask if there's any ways in which we might be able to serve you. Again, if you want to make contact also with us, it would for us be really a privilege. I will again end the conference by putting just some of our contact details on as a reference point. I just want to really say thank you to everybody's time. on a Friday morning, also booking out 2 hours to explore some optimized ways of thinking within the space of human profiling. We just love the space. We are so seriously passionate about people, and therefore also I would invite you guys to explore this as a new potential within your working environment. Again, not to replace, but to add on to that which is already working. So from my side, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the attendance today.
Thank you so much, Marcel, and thank you to all the delegates who were here today and took the time to listen what Marcel has to say about Shadowmatch and how it could potentially aid you in whichever way that you might see it fit. But yeah, so there's a lot of comments, Marcel, coming through for that they will contact you. So we do look forward to connecting with all of you off conference from here. But from now, from our side, from CCI Professional side, from both my side and Marcel's side, thank you so much for your participation, and we look forward to the next time we talk. Thank you.